How's it going, guys? Today, I'm gonna tell you why this $20 Milwaukee Fastback has been stuck in my pocket and why you're gonna want one too. This is the Milwaukee Fastback 6-in-1. Admittedly, not the sexiest naming convention, but with all the Fastbacks, Milwaukee does give them a unique serial code, so we're gonna call this thing the 1505. It's got a blade, it's got a driver, it's got a bottle opener, it's got a couple tricks, and we're gonna talk about that. But what makes the 1505 is that it's a lot more than the sum of all of its parts. But to understand why, we've gotta talk about the current state of EDC utility knives. Now, if you've done any research on EDC utility blades, chances are you've come across some great videos here on YouTube. I think two of the most comprehensive were done by our buddy Taylor Martin over at Best M EDC, and he actually has his own versions of different utility blades. There's this one that he gave us a few years ago, and he has some really cool ones going with big idea designs right now. On the upper end, you have things like the Chavez Chub, which is just gorgeous and beautiful, and on the lower end, you have things like the Gerber Prybrid, which is a pretty useful little tool. Now, I think most people, though, that carry these in pocket or carry these in their store would agree that they think of them as secondary carries. And there's nothing wrong with having two knives. I generally like to have two knives on me, right? Two is one is none, that whole thing. But if you're anything like me, you might be looking for a way to start simplifying some of these pocket tools that we carry. I love being prepared, but I hate having 20 things in my pocket all the time. That brings us to the consideration of the tools built into these different utility EDC knives. Sometimes they're really useful, like the design that we have here from Taylor and some of the stuff he's currently doing with Big Idea Designs. And sometimes they just follow the sin of most multi-tools where they add stuff to add stuff that's not actually useful. So if we take the considerations of our primary and secondary carry, we take the consideration of having some tools on us on a regular basis and having a good utility knife, we put all those ingredients in a bowl and bake it, what we come up with is a near perfect EDC utility knife in the 1505. Perfect or near perfect is a big claim for anything, but especially for a $20 knife. But you'll have to forgive me because I really am that excited about the 1505. It's got an overall length of 6.5 inches. The handle comes in right around 4.25 inches, which is perfect for a small, medium, or large hand. Here it is next to the Nafslander, and here it is next to the Wee Mini Malice. You've got a really smooth button lock for one-handed opening and closing. It has a fully extendable and locking bit driver that has a Phillips and standard bit on it, so you can use it for screwing or prying. On the front, you have a very serviceable wire strip, and then on the top of the knife, when it's closed, you have a great little bottle opener. And to round the whole package off, you've got an extra blade stored in the handle scales. With all that territory covered, you might be thinking, well, that's all really cool, but why would I actually carry a 1505? I'm glad you asked. Now, if you're just looking at the 1505 from a spec sheet, chances are you're gonna miss a lot of the minutia that make it really special. It's not until you get the tool in hand and really start using it that you understand that it's something different when it comes to folding utility knives. I mean, when we're looking at the driver portion of it, of course it has a driver, of course it locks, which is nice and not a given on every multi-tool. What you don't realize until you start using it is that with the length of the shaft and with the size of the handle, you're effectively getting a full-size screwdriver. So you have a folding, locking, full-size screwdriver in your pocket. And if you were to flip your bit and use the standard head as a pry bar, you won't be disappointed with how much leverage that handle really gives you. Going from the driver portion of the tool and to what is really like the main party, the utility blade aspect. Now, if you've never carried a utility blade for EDC purposes, it's pretty cool how useful it really is. First off, your knife is always sharp. So let's say that this side of my blade is sharp, I go to cut something, I notice that I need to put an edge on it. Well, don't worry about it because I literally just release it and I have now effectively sharpened my knife in about 0.5 seconds. And the Fastback doesn't waste a ton of space and time carrying 10,000 blades because you don't need that for EDC purposes, but you do have one extra spare if you've completely burnt out your main blade. On top of it being able to do that, you can release that blade and you can use it as a scraper, whether you're using it to get stickers or gunky stuff, or for me, head gaskets or gaskets on transmissions or whatever it may be. You have a scraper that will work really effectively and again, be razor sharp. Another really neat thing about carrying utility knives that I don't hear people talk about a lot is from a legal aspect. I'm not a lawyer, but what I mean by that is if you end up going to a concert with the 1505 in your pocket, or you end up going to the airport or whatever it may be, you can literally remove your blade from the knife. It's no longer a knife. Now, obviously you have to remove both blades, of course, but once you remove those blades, it's no longer a knife. I actually spent some time traveling around the country building gun ranges, and I would fly to some of those jobs. I'd ride my motorcycle to some of those jobs. When I was flying, I had a really chunky, not nearly as great, folding razor blade knife. I think it was from Harbor Freight. I would pull the razor blades out of that. I would put it in my carry-on, and I never got stopped. Now again, I'm not a lawyer, don't test the TSA, but it is pretty cool to think that you could go from having a knife in your pocket to not having a knife in your pocket. It's also pretty cool to think you could travel with the same knife everywhere you go, because you can get razor blades just about anywhere. The other solution that the 1505 is bringing to the EDC utility problem is that a lot of EDC utility blades are smaller secondary blades, or they're big, chunky construction blades. And the 1505 bridges that gap perfectly. When we compare it to something like, let's say, a Chavez Redencion or even a Kaiser drop bear, you can notice that the width on it really is not that different from knives that we carry regularly. So it's not taking up a bunch of pocket real estate, but it's giving you the full function of a full-sized knife. If you can't tell, I'm really digging this thing. But as with any tool, it's not without its special considerations. Whenever I do a review of a knife or tool on the channel, I always do my best to lay my biases on the table. And if you've watched the channel at all, you know that I am a huge Milwaukee fanboy. If it's red, black, and says Milwaukee, I'm at least going to try it. That being said, I don't carry things if they don't make sense, and I really am trying to condense down my pocket, and that's why when I threw this $20 knife in my pocket and fell in love with it, I had to tell you guys about it because it really is awesome. And just to be clear, nobody gave me this knife. I bought it from Ace Hardware. Nobody's paying me to say this. It just really is that good. Now, obviously, I didn't design this knife for my specific use case purposes, so there are two little things that I would change. One of them I think is really minor, and that's just I would like to see a two-way reversible pocket clip. I prefer to carry tip up, and this is a tip down carry pocket clip. The other thing, which is still fairly minor but would be a nice addition to change, is with the locking driver, you can open it with one hand. For right-handed people, you really need to have two hands to close it. I think those are two very small considerations that don't really affect anybody wanting to carry the 1505 on a regular basis. Now, if you've never carried a utility knife for EDC purposes, there is a big consideration that you're gonna wanna take, and that is cutting surface. If your tasks require a lot of cutting surface, the 1505 is not gonna be for you. No utility knife really is going to be for you. I mean, even if you compare it to a Launch 4, you have like half the cutting surface of a Launch 4, which is a tiny knife. So for example, if you're doing food prep with your knife regularly, 1505 is probably not for you. It's not gonna process apples and cheese very well. Personally, when I'm on the road, I use my pocket knife a lot for making PB&Js, and the 1505 is not going to spread peanut butter and jelly very well on bread. So that would be one huge consideration if you are gonna carry an EDC utility knife. The other thing, and this may or may not be important, is the 1505 has no bling factor. It's a utilitarian red and black. That being said, you can remove the scales very easily. They could be RIT dyed. There is a cutout on the front where you could put a patch of micarta, and yes, I'm already planning on doing that. So hopefully video inbound, let me know if you guys wanna see it, and I'll record the whole process and show you how this thing turns out, because I think it could be just a little bit cooler. All being said, I really think the 1505 is an amazing tool. You should consider at least checking it out. For 20 bucks, you really can't go wrong. We'll catch you on the next one.